Okay. Hey, Darcy, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. Welcome back to the show. I know you were on, a few months ago, maybe?
Yes. We were discussing Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and the
Sasquatch.
documentary. Yeah,
Right, that's right. Okay, so we covered Bigfoot, and now we're going to talk about UFOs. Is that correct?
that is right. Yeah. I recently released a documentary called Volcanic UFO Mysteries, and it's about very anomalous UFO activity that's been happening around volcanic active volcanoes in Latin America. And it's also about activism and discussing disclosure from the government and Stephen Bassett's role in that. I hope you interview Stephen Bassett sometime soon. You're going to love him.
Okay, so tell us who is Stephen Bassett, first of all.
So, Stephen Bassett has been involved in the political sort of side of things in an activist way for the UFO issue for over like about 20 years now. And you hear about a lot of people that are researching UFOs. I guess to some degree, you could even say I'm a researcher because I'm building these stories surrounding UFO events and such. Stephen Bassett's not necessarily a UFO researcher. He knows the data, he knows the prevalence of certain events that have happened throughout history, but he's a lobbyist on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., who's been fighting for disclosure from the government, with a capital D, as he says it. That is leading to an event where the president admits that there is a extraterrestrial presence that's interfacing with planet Earth. A few things have to happen before that kind of event would ever come to fruition. As crazy as it sounds, some people are listening to me say that. As it comes out of my mouth, they're thinking, hello, what? That would never happen. But if you look at the chain of events that have happened in recent history since 2017, when To the Stars Academy released the Tic Tac UFO and Gimbal UFO videos to New York Times and many other mass media sources, these videos were given to them by the Pentagon. They were given to them by somebody in the Department of Defense in the United States. And that means that there's an interest now to let the public know in on a secret that's been held for a long time. How long, you might ask? Since 1947. So people say, the most covered UFO case in history was probably the Roswell, New Mexico crash.
Right.
Um, there are people that go two ways on that story. But if you do your research, if you're not an illiterate on this subject, you'll find that Jesse Marcel and other people that were working for the military at the time came out and they made two different statements. They made one statement saying, "We've captured a craft." And then they retracted that statement and said to the public through news media, it was actually a weather balloon. And since then, people have been very skeptical on whether to believe this subject or not. And there has been way more events that have happened throughout history since then, mass daylight witness sightings, nighttime sightings. We're talking Westall 66 in Australia, Phoenix Lights, Ariella School in Africa. These are all very credible events, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of witnesses, um, investigations that were done by credible, you know, uh, high-ranking government officials and such. Senator Fife Symington, to name one, for the Phoenix Lights in Arizona, that event. So what I'm saying is there's lots of credibility to the subject if you do your research. And Stephen Bassett had done his research, but had organized people in a political way. He's had petitions signed. He's been part of mock congressional hearings to have some of the most credible witnesses to a truth embargo. So meaning there's a law in place protecting the public from being exposed to this information. A lot of people will discuss UFOs, and the armchair skeptic in most people, the first thing that they'll think of when they hear about UFOs, or now UAPs is what the Department of Defense are calling it.
What's a UAP?
UAP was coined in the past 4 years by the Department of Defense, and it stands for unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Okay. Let me stop you here for a second because our time is limited and I want to get a couple of questions in. Let's assume for the second that UFOs exist. I don't want to get into the argument of do they exist and don't they exist and the tinfoil hat and the whole bit. Assuming they do.
Sure.
And assuming that most people have a mistrust of the government, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, and I think all over the world, we're just allowed to express it versus some people in other countries that are not allowed to express their dissatisfaction and distrust with the government. This is one issue that I think that it would be in the best interest of the government to keep secret, because if they had let it out, it could cause mass panic amongst people. Now, I'm not suggesting that they should. I'm saying that I understand the motivation for them to do so. Okay? And the other thing is that, I don't know if you've seen the movie Battleship, but
yes.
There was a great
Unfortunately.
there was a great line in that film where the guy said, this is going to be like Columbus and the Indians, except we're going to be the Indians.
Sure.
And I mean, that's true in the sense that if people have the technology, extraterrestrial beings, to interplanetary travel, to come to this world, to our Earth, that their technology is going to be far superior than ours. It would have to be, right?
Sure.
Because we don't have that capability. So, okay, so long-winded question. So my point is why, because you mentioned back a few minutes ago that the Pentagon actually released this film. Okay, why would they do that?
Through To the Stars Academy, which was headed up by Tom DeLonge.
Okay, so why would they do that? What would be the motivation for doing that?
There's a few different things at play here, and your question and your explanation is very good. There's a couple things that I have to unpack there. So first of all, if you think about the history of this subject and it being covered up consistently, there being a lie told to the public that there's nothing to see here. Conspiracy is thrown around a lot, right? And conspiracy basically means a group of people that mean to do something harmful or unlawful. And this subject matter, the whole idea of not being alone in the universe and being, interfaced to some degree with extraterrestrials, but that truth being hidden from us, that's not a conspiracy. Because what probably is happening and has happened since 1947 is there's been an embargo, meaning there has been a law against discussing this and creating what you said, public panic. So what they're noticing now, and you probably have noticed yourself, if you go on to any film streaming site or you go onto Google and you search UFO, there's a billion different sources for you to read up about this type of material and to watch fictional things about this material or watch one of my documentaries or other documentarians. There's hundreds. There's books, hundreds of books, thousands of books written in different languages from different people's experiences around the world regarding UFOs, meaning it's not just isolated to the United States. And basically, we're at an all-time, I mean, the number one thing that's Googled internationally, other than pornography, believe it or not, is UFOs. And so that means that they know that there is public support for this type of disclosure now. There's people like Stephen Bassett and people like myself who are pushing for disclosure. There's a huge appetite for it. And we're at a time in our history where the government needs to buy back some trust.
Well,
okay?
I agree with that.
You mentioned that there's this distrust out there internationally, you know. Every single government has been keeping this secret. And if the United States is a leader in disclosing this, then they will buy back trust in other governments that are part of the truth embargo, because this is like most likely a United Nations type thing. You know, recently a director of the Israeli Space Agency came forward. This is in the past 2 months. And he said, I think his name is Oshed, he said, we are being interfaced with extraterrestrials and we're meeting them in space and the public doesn't know about it and they should. You know, that was his admission to an Israeli newspaper. And that made headlines internationally. And he's one of many insiders, government, military, pilots, space agency folks from around the world that have come forward over the years and said, I know something, and this is the truth. So it's building up. It's like breaking the camel's back, so to speak, and it's the right time. And I think the American government knows that. There's probably a lot of people inside of the military that have been part of keeping this secret for a long time that are reluctant to let it out. But we're just at this time where it has to.
Okay. The one thing that I would say as a good reason, a benefit, aside from your comment about buying back trust of the government, which I definitely agree with, is the fact that if it is made clear that there is other life besides us, it would certainly refocus our hatred towards each other. I've always said that the easiest way to achieve world peace is if the Martians were to invade, because then we could point our guns at them rather than at each other.
You sound like Ronald Reagan, and he said the very same thing to the United Nations when he was president.
It's true. I think it's true.
He said the same thing, and people say that he might have had some inside information during the Star Wars program that was happening. Somebody may have leaked some information to him about what's going on in space and that we're not alone out there. But that's it. I don't think there's anything out there that is concerned about killing us, enslaving us. I think if they're at an intergalactic travel sort of place in their evolution, they're beyond trying to act like humans, you know, enslaving the third world and becoming rich. That's not their interest.
I think that's very encouraging. That means there's probably hope for us in the next 200 years or so.
I hope so.
We have your trailer, which we'll show at the end. But I did want to just ask you real quick about the volcano significance.
Okay.
Can you do that in about 1 minute?
Sure.
And then we're going to have to wrap it up.
We cover multiple Latin American erupting volcanoes that have happened throughout history where UFOs, what looks like craft similar to the Tic Tac UFO, are seen hovering around, going into, coming out of, and sometimes just slowly cruising through ash clouds. None of our commercial aircraft or military aircraft would be able to withstand the force of a volcano. And so that makes you wonder, why are they interested in these volcanic regions? There's millions of people surrounding there. There may be some intervention interest there, but it's a mystery, and the documentary is highlighting these mysteries.
Do you have a website for the
Sure.
for the documentary, or a personal website you want to give out?
They can just go to www.occultjourneys.com, and all of my films are there with their posters and such.
Okay, great. Darcy, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me, Douglas. I really hope you speak with Stephen at some time.
Yeah, we'll try to get him on.
The most amazing related to the activity of UFO around the volcano
is that we have a mounting evidence from scores of witnesses who had national security clearances about these craft.
It's a big